At 0621 hours on March 8, 2026, in the choke point waters 32 nautical miles northeast of the Strait of Hormuz, the radar operator aboard the USS Gerald R. Ford CVN-78 watched his screen light up with a contact pattern that made his stomach drop. 18 Iranian fast attack craft had just broken formation from what appeared to be a routine naval exercise and were now accelerating directly toward the American carrier strike group at 52 knots. The signature matched the Zulfiqar-class missile boats, each one carrying 4 C-704 anti-ship missiles with 130-kilogram warheads. But that was just the surface threat. At the exact same moment, the SQQ-89 acoustic warfare system detected a low-frequency anomaly at bearing 215 degrees, depth 110 meters. The pattern recognition software flagged it immediately. A Fateh-class submarine had been lying in wait on the seabed for an unknown duration and was now flooding its torpedo tubes. The $13 billion supercarrier, home to 4,539 personnel and 75 aircraft, was caught in a two-dimensional kill box with Iranian forces closing from above and below simultaneously. The carrier air wing was in the worst possible configuration. Due to a scheduled maintenance rotation, only 6 F/A-18E Super Hornets were combat-ready on deck with pilots strapped in. The remaining 69 aircraft were either undergoing maintenance, refueling, or weapons loading. Launch authorization would take a minimum of 8 minutes. The Iranian boats would reach missile launch range in 4 minutes and 20 seconds. If the Ford increased speed to open the range, the massive propeller wash would create a sonar signature so loud that every Iranian submarine within 40 kilometers would get a perfect firing solution. If the Aegis destroyers flanking the carrier activated their Spy-6 radars to full power for missile defense, the electromagnetic emissions would give the Fateh submarine the precise targeting data it needed to launch wire-guided torpedoes. If the carrier launched aircraft prematurely with incomplete weapons loads, they would be vulnerable to the Iranian air defense network that intelligence reported had been upgraded with Russian S-300 systems. The Ford's strike group commander, Rear Admiral Sarah Blackwood, had exactly 260 seconds to solve a multi-axis threat that had been specifically designed to exploit the one moment of maximum vulnerability during a maintenance cycle. She was about to order a tactical maneuver so audacious that it would either go down in naval history as brilliant improvisation or catastrophic recklessness. A maneuver that would turn America's most advanced carrier into bait for a trap more devastating than anything Iran had anticipated. Rewind to 0548 hours, when the U.S. Navy still believed they owned the tactical initiative in these waters. The USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group was conducting Operation Steadfast Sentinel, a freedom of navigation patrol designed to counter Iran's February 28 declaration of a security zone extending 45 nautical miles from their coastline. The formation was perfectly arrayed, the Ford at the center, protected by the Arleigh Burke-class destroyer USS John Finn to port, the Ticonderoga-class cruiser USS Normandy to starboard, and the Virginia-class submarine USS Colorado prowling at 220 meters depth providing an underwater picket line. The E-2D Advanced Hawkeye early warning aircraft orbiting at 28,000 feet reported normal maritime traffic patterns. The AN/SPY-6 V-1 radar systems showed 47 civilian merchant vessels transiting the shipping lanes, 12 Iranian naval vessels conducting what appeared to be routine coastal patrol exercises 60 kilometers to the north, and 0 hostile intent indicators. That assessment was Iran's masterwork of strategic deception. For 19 days, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy had been deliberately increasing the tempo of routine exercises in the region, conditioning American intelligence analysts to treat their naval movements as predictable background noise. What U.S. satellite reconnaissance didn't detect was that 40% of those exercise cycles were actually rehearsals for a specific attack profile, refined through 23 iterations, designed to exploit the 90-minute window when American carriers conduct scheduled aircraft maintenance rotations. Iranian intelligence had been tracking the Ford's operational patterns since it entered the Persian Gulf on February 18. They documented the precise timing of shift changes, cataloged the electromagnetic signature variations during different flight operations, and identified the mathematical window when the carrier would have minimum airborne defensive capability. They knew that between 0615 and 0745 hours, the Ford would have fewer than 8 combat-ready aircraft on deck. At 0615 hours, The trap was sprung with surgical precision. The Iranian Naval Operations Command transmitted a compressed data burst on a frequency that mimicked civilian maritime safety traffic. Simultaneously, 18 Zulfiqar-class fast attack craft that had been disguised as fishing support vessels among a fleet of 60-plus civilian boats suddenly activated their military IFF transponders and broke formation. Their turbofan marine diesel engines pushed them to maximum combat speed, and they arranged themselves into a formation called Desert Arrow, specifically designed to saturate Aegis defense systems through multi-axis simultaneous approach vectors. These weren't simple speedboats. Each Zulfiqar displaced 14 tons and carried a sophisticated Chinese-built phased array radar system, integrated fire control, and a defensive suite that included chaff launchers and infrared countermeasures. The IRGC had learned from decades of studying American naval doctrine and understood that Aegis systems, while incredibly capable, had a mathematical limitation. They could only generate firing solutions for 18 to 24 simultaneous high-speed threats before the processing architecture experienced target priority conflicts. The Iranians had brought exactly 18 boats. Simultaneously, underwater warfare hell was unleashed with cold precision. The Fateh-class submarine, hull number 901, had been conducting a mission the U.S. Navy didn't think was possible. For 76 hours, it had been sitting motionless on a specific sector of the seabed that Iranian acoustic engineers had identified through months of underwater mapping as a shadow zone, a thermocline convergence point where water temperature variations created a natural sonar blind spot. The submarine's Sahand 2 air-independent propulsion system allowed it to remain submerged without snorkeling, producing zero detectable emissions. The Fateh's captain didn't activate any systems that would give away his position. Instead, he waited in absolute silence, listening through passive sonar for the specific acoustic signature of a Nimitz-class carrier's propeller wash. When the Gerald R. Ford passed overhead at 0603 hours, he began a silent intercept calculation, using only mathematics and patience. At 0621 hours, when the Ford reached the predetermined kill zone coordinates, he flooded tubes 1 through 4 and opened the outer doors with a hydraulic system so quiet it registered below ambient ocean noise. On the Ford's bridge, Admiral Blackwood stared at the multidimensional nightmare materializing on the tactical display. The 18 Iranian boats were now 23 kilometers away and closing at 52 knots. Time to missile launch range: 4 minutes, 11 seconds. Standard doctrine called for the Aegis destroyers to engage with SM-2 missiles at maximum range while the carrier executed evasive maneuvers and launched all available aircraft. But the maintenance cycle created a catastrophic complication. The flight deck coordinator reported that only 6 Super Hornets were combat-ready. Launching them against an air defense network that included S-300 systems and Iranian F-14 Tomcats would be sending them into a meat grinder. The remaining aircraft needed a minimum of 7 minutes to complete weapons loading and pre-flight checks. The carrier couldn't launch an effective air defense. The submarine warfare coordinator reported an even darker picture. The Fateh-class submarine had 4 torpedo tubes open, and based on acoustic signature analysis, the weapons were VALFAJR-2 torpedoes, Iranian upgrades of the Chinese U-4 design with wake homing capability. If launched, impact time would be 127 seconds. The USS Colorado could engage with Mark 48 torpedoes, but counterfire would create a sonar whiteout that would blind the strike group's acoustic defenses for 6 to 8 minutes, during which Iranian reinforcements could arrive. The nightmare escalated exponentially when the electronic warfare officer reported active radar emissions from Iranian coastal positions. The signature matched the Mersad air defense system, an Iranian upgrade of the American Hawk missile system, with a range of 40 kilometers and the ability to engage multiple targets simultaneously. The Iranian strategy was crystallizing. Force the Ford to radiate electromagnetic emissions for missile defense, giving the coastal batteries the precise coordinates they needed to launch a follow-up strike. Admiral Blackwood faced a perfect tactical checkmate: defend against the boats and expose the carrier to submarine attack, counter the submarine and create acoustic blindness that would allow the boats to close unmolested, activate full radar for air defense and broadcast the strike group's position to every Iranian weapons system in theater. Every conventional response led to casualties. Now, drop your prediction in the comments. If you think Admiral Blackwood will navigate through this multi-axis trap without firing an offensive shot, type 1. If you believe this escalates into a full shooting war with American blood in the water, type 2. Make your call now. Here's what actually happened in those critical 260 seconds. Admiral Blackwood didn't order missile launches or evasive maneuvers. Instead, she grabbed the red phone for Subcom direct line and issued an order that made every officer in the Combat Information Center question her sanity. Colorado. Emergency blow to surface. Full active sonar, maximum power omnidirectional. And launch every noisemaker in your inventory. I want you to sound like the apocalypse. The USS Colorado's commanding officer had exactly 8 seconds of hesitation before executing the unprecedented order. The Virginia-class submarine initiated an emergency ballast blow, rocketing toward the surface from 220 meters depth while simultaneously activating its AN/BQQ-10 sonar suite in a mode called Hammer Protocol. A brute-force acoustic blast so intense it could be detected 200 kilometers away. The submarine also launched 12 ADC-Mk2 acoustic devices, each one programmed to emit the sound signature of a Los Angeles-class submarine running at flank speed. The effect was instantaneous and devastating to Iranian tactical planning. The Fateh-class submarine, whose entire operational advantage depended on acoustic stealth and precise firing solutions, suddenly found itself operating in an underwater environment that sounded like a symphony of jackhammers. The passive sonar arrays were completely overwhelmed. The wire-guided torpedo firing solution became impossible to maintain. The VALFAJR-2 torpedoes, already primed in their tubes, couldn't receive coherent guidance data through the acoustic chaos. But more importantly, the massive acoustic signature created a false tactical picture to every hydrophone in the Persian Gulf. It appeared that the U.S. Navy had just deployed multiple attack submarines in a rapid defensive screen. The Fateh's captain, trained to avoid submarine versus submarine engagements at all costs, made the tactically sound decision to abort the torpedo launch and retreat to deeper water. The underwater threat was neutralized. Simultaneously, Admiral Blackwood executed the surface component of her gambit. She ordered what naval aviators call the shell game. The 6 combat-ready A-18E Super Hornets were launched in rapid succession. But instead of forming a defensive combat air patrol, they executed a maneuver called Ghost Multiply. Each aircraft climbed to 15,000 feet and activated its AN/ALQ-214 integrated defensive electronic countermeasures system in a specific mode that created false radar returns. To Iranian radar operators, each Super Hornet appeared as 4 separate contacts. 6 aircraft suddenly looked like 24. The Iranian Mersad air defense batteries, programmed to prioritize the largest aerial threats first, began tracking what they believed was a major American airstrike package forming up. Their fire control radars went to full active mode, searching for firing solutions against the apparent incoming swarm. That electromagnetic radiation was exactly what Admiral Blackwood needed. The moment the Mersad systems went active, the USS John Finn's AN/SLQ-32 V-7 electronic warfare suite locked onto the emissions and began a sophisticated attack called frequency fracture. The destroyer's system analyzed the Mersad radar's operating frequency, identified the exact modulation pattern, and then transmitted a series of false target returns that mimicked American cruise missiles approaching from 6 different vectors simultaneously. The Iranian fire control computers, suddenly overwhelmed with what appeared to be a massive Tomahawk strike, went into defense priority mode and shifted all targeting away from the carrier strike group to engage the Phantom cruise missile threat. The coastal missile batteries were effectively paralyzed by their own defensive protocols. But the 18 fast attack craft remained the primary kinetic threat, now only 11 kilometers away and entering missile launch range. Admiral Blackwood didn't order the Aegis destroyers to engage. Instead, she activated a system that the U.S. Navy had been testing in absolute secrecy for 14 months. The AN/SLQ-68 Maritime Tactical Deception System. The USS Normandy had been quietly fitted with prototype directed energy emitters disguised as standard radar arrays. These weren't weapons in the traditional sense. They were psychological warfare tools operating at the quantum level. The system transmitted precisely calibrated bursts of electromagnetic energy on frequencies that interfered with the electronic fuel injection systems of the Iranian boat's Toafan diesel engines. The effect was subtle but catastrophic. At 52 knots, marine diesel engines operate at maximum thermal stress. The directed energy pulses caused microscopic timing disruptions in the fuel injection sequence, creating incomplete combustion cycles. 3 of the Iranian boats experienced immediate engine failures. 5 more boats had their engines shift into limp mode protection protocols, cutting their speed by 65%. The perfect desert arrow formation disintegrated into chaos. But Admiral Blackwood wasn't finished with her technological ambush. The E-2D Hawkeye, which had been orbiting passively, suddenly activated its APY-9 radar in a mode called Cooperative Engagement Capability Ghost Track. The system created a network of false radar returns that appeared as a second American carrier strike group approaching from the southeast at high speed. To the Iranian tactical coordinators watching from their command center in Bandar Abbas, it appeared that they had been lured into a trap. What they thought was an isolated carrier strike group was actually the leading edge of a much larger American naval force. The choice became stark. Press the attack against the fort and risk being caught between 2 carrier groups, or withdraw and preserve forces for later engagement. Iranian naval doctrine, heavily influenced by defensive strategic thinking, prioritized force preservation over risky offensive operations. At 0625 hours, the remaining 10 functional fast attack craft received a coded transmission from Fleet Command. Abort attack. Execute dispersal pattern Delta 7. Return to base via civilian shipping corridors. The surface threat evaporated without a single missile being fired. But Admiral Blackwood understood that the victory was tactical, not strategic. She immediately ordered the strike group to shift to a formation called expanded defensive posture, increasing the spacing between ships to reduce vulnerability to follow-up attacks while maintaining full sensor coverage. The 6 Super Hornets were kept aloft, rotating with fresh aircraft as they became available, maintaining constant combat air patrol. In the Ford's Intelligence Center, analysts were conducting a real-time assessment that painted a disturbing picture. The Iranian attack had been aborted, but the data collection mission had been wildly successful for Tehran. During the 26-minute engagement, Iranian intelligence had harvested comprehensive electronic signatures of the Ford's defensive systems, documented the acoustic profile of the Colorado's emergency surface maneuver, and mapped the electromagnetic fingerprint of the Navy's newest electronic warfare capabilities. The Americans had won the battle but exposed their most classified technological advantages. In Tehran, the Supreme National Security Council's Naval Warfare Analysis Unit was already processing the intelligence windfall. They now knew that U.S. carriers were vulnerable during maintenance cycles, that American submarines would sacrifice acoustic stealth to protect the strike group, and that the new directed energy systems had effective range limitations. The boats that experienced engine failures were all within 8 kilometers of the USS Normandy, while boats beyond that range were unaffected. In Washington, the Pentagon's Crisis Response Cell received Admiral Blackwood's after-action report with a mixture of relief and concern. 0 casualties, 0 shots fired, complete tactical success. But the intelligence cost was enormous. Every defensive innovation they had deployed was now cataloged in Iranian databases, being analyzed by Chinese and Russian military advisors, and would be countered in the next confrontation. The Ford strike group reached international waters at 0847 hours, with all systems green and full combat readiness restored. The tactical displays showed clear zones in all directions, but in the carrier's flag plotting room, Admiral Blackwood was already wargaming the next encounter. Iran had probed with 18 boats and 1 submarine. Next time, it might be 40 boats, 3 submarines, and coastal anti-ship missiles launching simultaneously, a coordinated strike designed specifically to overwhelm every defensive innovation the U.S. Navy had just revealed. The engagement in the Strait of Hormuz on March 8, 2026, ended without a single weapon fired in anger. The political calculation was precise. Launching offensive strikes against Iranian vessels in disputed waters would trigger the regional conflict that both nations wanted to avoid. But the message had been transmitted in the silent language of electromagnetic warfare and acoustic deception. Iran proved they could threaten America's most advanced carrier in waters the U.S. Navy had dominated for decades. America proved they could counter those threats, but at a cost measured in exposed secrets and strategic vulnerability. The USS Gerald R. Ford turned southwest toward the Arabian Sea, her crew exhausted but unharmed. Behind them, in the dark waters off the Iranian coast, the Fateh-class submarine was already returning to its shadow zone on the seabed, preparing for the next round with updated targeting protocols designed to operate in high-noise environments. In the IRGC naval workshops, engineers were already reverse engineering countermeasures against directed energy interference. studying the electromagnetic signatures they had captured, planning the next iteration of their anti-carrier tactics. The biggest question remained unanswered in both Washington and Tehran. What happens when both sides integrate these hard-learned lessons into their next confrontation? What happens when Iran combines mass swarm attacks with submarine wolfpacks and coastal missile barrages in a single coordinated strike designed specifically to exhaust every defensive system the US Navy just demonstrated? The sensors are hot, the board is set, and in the narrow waters of the Strait of Hormuz, the next round of this deadly game is already being planned in the silent depths and in the classified briefing rooms of two nations that understand one absolute truth. Modern naval warfare is no longer about who fires first, but about who owns the electromagnetic spectrum, controls the information space, and can turn the enemy's own technology into a weapon against them. The Ford sailed into open ocean, victorious but exposed, carrying 4,539 souls who knew they had just survived the opening move of a much longer game.